Hey there folks, this is Josiah Mackin here at Utila Dive Center. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of Sidemount and the configuration itself and what all the fuss is about. Sidemount diving is configuration where you have two completely autonomous tanks with two separate regulators, two separate pressure gauges. One sits on the right side of the torso, the other one sits on the left side of the torso. It's a very comfortable way of diving. It naturally causes you to go into really good trim position. The origins of cave diving started in the UK in the 1960s. There was dry cave explorers exploring systems throughout the UK, and occasionally in these cave systems they would reach areas, low areas of the cave called a sump that would be flooded. And to get any further into the cave, they required some way to get through this sump of water. So what they came up with was some scuba diving gear. I believe they actually originally used some firefighting equipment, the masks from that and the bottles, and they would just use them to duck under these small passageways and continue their dry exploration of the cave. Once people started getting more into full cave diving, like in Florida, these techniques in the so-called English system, the setup of having two side mount tanks, migrated its way to Florida cave diving. And since Florida caves are constantly submerged, there's no dry areas in them, there was different requirements needed by these divers. They needed larger cylinders because they were going to consume more air, and there was at no point in the dive where they would come up to the surface or come out of the water and be able to breathe natural air in the cave system. When I started side mount diving, it was to do my cave diving course, but nowadays you see more and more divers using the versatility, the redundancy, and just the enjoyment of the style of diving to dive on reefs around the world, wreck diving and wreck penetration dives, as well as cavern and cave diving as well. So the first thing you need when side mount diving is two cylinders with opposing valves. So the valve handle should face outwards, which allow you to close an open tank with your right hand and with your left hand with the valves on the outside. Once you have that in place, you're going to need two cylinder bands or cam bands that will have a bolt snap on them, and those are going to get adjusted to the correct height for your torso, and the bolt snaps will connect to your D-rings on the waist strap of your harness. On your left tank, you'll have your regulator first stage and second stage, as well as a pressure gauge and a short low pressure inflator hose to connect to your low pressure inflator. On your right tank, you will have your first and second stage regulator with a 6-foot long hose on that regulator, as well as a pressure gauge. At UDC, we offer the side mount diver course at a recreational level, and this can be used as well in the rec specialty course at UDC. We also offer tech side mount as part of our technical diving programs here at UDC. Tech side mount is using side mount diving for your technical diving as well. So if you prefer to have all your tanks in front of you, which I did when I started tech diving, I really enjoyed having everything in front of me and being able to see it and maneuver it without reaching behind my head. So in technical side mount diving, you would not have double tanks on your back, you would have your side mount tanks as well as your deco bottles all on the front of you. The tanks that would be on the front of you would not be all the same gas. You would have your standard back gas, which may be air or some other mixture of gas depending on the dive you're planning, and then your deco bottles, which could be a 50% oxygen and 100% oxygen. Let's talk about some of the do's and don'ts of side mount diving. So one of the things you have to do when you're side mount diving is you have to periodically exchange regulators. If you just breathe from one side or the other, your tank is going to get drained and it's going to cause your buoyancy and trim to be off. So every 100 PSI or every minute or two, you should be swapping regulators to keep the balance in the two tanks. Another thing you need to do when side mount diving is to make sure you keep your back arched. You don't want to have your waist bent down and so your feet point down and your head points down. You really have to kind of arch your back in a way that's going to cause your lower back muscles to hurt for probably your first 5 side mount dives. But once you develop those muscles, it doesn't bother you anymore. But those are two things that you really have to do in side mount diving. Some of the things you don't want to do in side mount diving is have your tanks be too off trim. We call it grasshopper tanks, where the tank comes up from the body and sticks up like this, and it kind of makes you look like you have grasshopper legs. This is something you don't want. And how you avoid this is by adjusting and sliding the D-rings and adjusting your tanks throughout the dive to compensate for that increased buoyancy of the tank as we use the gas inside. Now, one of the great things about side mount diving is obviously the versatility, the practicality, the safety, but the number one thing really is that it just makes you look really cool. Well, I hope that answered your guys' questions about what side mount diving is and where it came from and what its different uses are. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us at Utila Dive Center. We'd love to answer them for you so you can come down here and learn how to side mount dive yourself.